Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we are rejoining prior guest and friend Tim Muehlhoff, co-author of a new book called Winsome Persuasion, Christian Influence in a Post-Christian World. Tim, welcome back to the program.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to see you. Tim is got his doctorate from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's a professor of communication at Biola University in La Mirada, California, where he teaches classes in family communication, interpersonal communication, persuasion, and gender. He's the author of I Beg to Differ and Marriage Forecasting, and the co-author of The God Conversation, Using Stories and Illustrations to Explain Your Faith and Authentic Communications, Christian Speak Engaging Culture. He and his wife Noreen are frequent speakers at family life marriage conferences, and he served with Campus Crusade since 1986. They live in Brea, California with their 3 boys, and we had Tim on to talk about explaining that conversation with God, using stories and illustrations, and it was a great interview, and actually didn't really even identify that you had this project going on at the time that was going to be presented to us and give us an opportunity to come back and visit with you. You co-authored the book with Richard Langer, and you two teach together there at Biola.
Yeah, Rick is great. He's one of the sharpest thinkers I know. He's a wonderful communicator, a real student of Christian history. Our book has a bunch of historical sketches throughout it that gives confidence to Christians today that in the past, Christians have spoken to the majority and have been very successful. They really have made a difference in changing history. So there's a lot of great examples like Harriet Beecher Stowe, Wilberforce, St. Patrick that we really can take comfort in.
In this book called Winsome Persuasion, Christian Influence in a Post-Christian World, what was it that you found that was the motivation, the stimulating factor to tackle this head on and call it winsome persuasion as opposed to Socratic method or apologetics, or what other names that we've assigned to the sharing of the gospel, and to make it more natural, to incorporate it into our persona as opposed to it to being a separate and distinct part of us, into interweaving it into who we are, not what we are.
Well, I think the reason we wrote it is we are like most Americans. We're just frustrated with what we see today on the news, social media, that we are treating each other in very uncivil ways. There's a new national survey that just came out. 65% of Americans say that we have a problem with incivility. 75% say that incivility has reached crisis proportions, and a whopping 97% believe that the president should be an example of civility. So I think today we're frustrated. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, I don't care if you're a Christian or not. All of us have reached a tipping point today where we just feel like this can't continue. We cannot continue to talk about differences in such an incivil way, what Deborah Tannen, a Georgetown linguist, calls the argument culture. We've got to find a different way of doing this. So Winsome Persuasion is our attempt to shift the conversation away from this diatribe, vitriolic communication to more of a winsome conversation where even if we disagree with each other, we can still find common ground and still be civil to each other, still be cordial to each other. And that's the hope of the book.
In this time that I think we would all agree is becoming more and more in the image of the days of Noah. As we're looking at the geopolitical climate, the rise of Islam is a very clear dividing line that is dividing the world into very clear division in humanity as to style and content and faith and application, and we're seeing a level of persecution like we've never seen before. The landscape and the climate of the Middle East is beginning to take shape and form and function and relationship to setting up what we see as the forefront or the ushering in of the setting of the stage for the campaign of Armageddon. That we're seeing an increase in what I would say is demonic activity. The last time we saw this level of demonic activity was at the first coming of Jesus. There was this kind of activity where there was death and persecution and the conflict between theologies was palpable. There was a conflict between Rome and Israel. There was a conflict within Israel between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And then the Messiah comes along and there is a distinct conflict between him and the established Jewish thought. And while he's teaching, he's dealing with the demons. They're all over the place trying to manipulate and manage and get him killed, and killed at birth, killed at 2, killed any way but the way the Bible says he fulfills prophecy. They were doing everything. Now we're seeing again an increase, and we're seeing a persecution that is not the same kind of persecution that we read about in the Middle East with beheadings, but we're seeing violent protests of the invocation of just God into a message at a university. We're seeing this move to distinctly silence the gospel message.
Well, not just the gospel, but a conservative message is being silenced. So Berkeley is just down the street from Biola University. Berkeley is the home of the free speech movement. I mean, they are the greatest example of free speech on a college campus that we can think of in the United States. Well, you may remember that last year, the Republican student group wanted to bring on a speaker who was fairly controversial, and they absolutely said no because they couldn't protect his safety because riots were happening anytime a conservative voice was brought on campus. So here's Berkeley, my goodness, who now says, yeah, I'm sorry, we can't protect conservative speakers. So what message is that being sent to students, that the best way to have this disagreement today is to silence the other side, is to not even let the other side have any part in the dialogue? So I think what is happening, though, is an opportunity is presenting itself that in the midst of all of this, we can present as Christian communicators a winsome, civil, kind, compassionate communication style that I think people will find attractive in the midst of today's argument culture.
In creating a host, if you will, for the presence of God to emanate from you, to actually meet the biblical standard that Jesus said, that let your light so shine, that man would see your good works and bring glory to your Father in heaven. That we have been playing the part of Christian in our speech and presentation, but we have not been convincing in our actions, our lifestyle, our behaviors to be distinguishable. And, Paul said that the gift of salvation was given to the Gentiles to provoke Israel to envy. Well, the broader scope would be the gift of salvation is given to anyone to provoke any non-believer to envy. Not just a particular group, but to all, but to the Jew first. But that they would be envious of something that I have that they don't. And that they would provoke them to inquire. That's where this concept comes from, is that now I've created an environment where there can be an open dialogue, which is a natural discourse, as opposed to an evangelical pulpit presentation, whether I'm sitting in Starbucks or I'm standing on the bema. We tend to be preachy as opposed to being reflective of the attributes and the characteristics of Matthew 5 and the conduct, kind of standard of conduct of the Beatitudes.
Absolutely. When I was at UNC Chapel Hill, Christians were used as an example of the argument culture. We were used as an example of what incivility actually looked like. Barna research shows that when you go to 20-somethings, non-Christian individuals in their 20s, that they would describe Christians as being hostile, dismissive, anti-gay, and ultra-conservative. So I think that presents an opportunity again for us to step in and flip the script, break stereotypes. And in the book we mentioned St. Patrick. So when St. Patrick got to Ireland, Ireland's whole economy was based on warfare, slavery, and barbarism. So what St. Patrick did is he created these communities and said, if you are tired of how life is being done, come into this community and you can see what it's like to treat everybody fairly, to treat each other with compassion, have fair trade, be courteous to each other, loving to each other, practicing neighbor love. And I think that goes back to what you said about being envious, is that today we want to create a communication style and a community that people look at us and say, man, I want to be a part of that. I don't necessarily agree with Christians, but I love how they communicate with each other, and I love how they communicate even with people who bitterly disagree with them. And in Winsome Persuasion, we try to lay out the game plan of how we can actually develop communities that are winsome, loving, and telling the truth. And as we interact with those outside the Christian community, hopefully they'll notice a difference and can be influenced.
I had an interesting interview yesterday with an author who wrote a book called The 7 Deadly Virtues. Not the 7 deadly sins, the 7 deadly virtues. A very interesting approach to Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, of taking these virtues, but being so rigid in the application of those virtues that they actually became stumbling blocks. They actually became reflection of the Pharisaical attitude. The people who were religious were adopting a religious spirit, and then that became a stumbling block, and they became condemning and judgmental, and they took these virtues and created this false balance. And this ties directly in to what your premise is that if I incorporate the gospel message into my being, and it is part of who I am, and my behavior is kind of kept in check by the Holy Spirit, so that I'm not evangelizing, I'm not proselytizing, I am reflecting the attributes that are what attracted people to listen to Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. But we also want to, yes, so I love that. I love the fact that our lives are reflecting the goodness of the gospel. But there also comes a time when we have to make an argument. There are things that happen in culture, there's things that happen in your local civic government that you are opposed to. And so now you want to actually go to a town hall meeting. Now you actually want to speak up in your community. So how do you do that in a way that you're going to gain an audience with people and not turn them off at the beginning? So we've got to think long and hard about how to start conversations. There's a communication scholar who says the way that you start a conversation is how it's going to end. So if we start it with hostility or defensiveness or aggressiveness, that's how it's going to end. So we suggest that we take a page out of the book of Proverbs that says, you know, gentleness can gather people's attention, that kindness is a way of opening a dialogue about very sensitive issues. So I love what you're saying. It's the marriage of living a certain life. So this is where Paul says to the church at Rome, hey, when your enemy's hungry, I want you to feed them. I want you to give them something to drink, minister to these people, and then your message is going to be that much more attractive and winsome.
When we look at the worldview that we really are up against, we're kind of at an interesting balance in the majority of Americans would identify themselves as Christians in the 70 percentile range.
Yeah.
But in these town hall debates, in these university academia presentations, the conduct which seems to get the most coverage is the overt, loud, and conflictive.
Yeah.
And the one who comes to speak the message of reconciliation or the counterpoint to that is labeled and identified and becomes the focus of that, so it becomes intimidating.
Yeah.
How in Winsome Persuasion do we not lead? And I think this is where the setup comes in. You have a roster of speakers, and the roster of speakers is this guy is from Planned Parenthood, and this person's, and you clearly know where they're coming from, and this person is with such and such, and this person is senior pastor of such and such, and so they're all prepared that they're going to give a round of applause to the Planned Parenthood person because it's, you know, a woman's body belongs to a woman and they have those rights. And the next speaker is talking about sanctuary cities, and the next speaker is talking about community support for, and because they're a Christian and they're a pastor, they're now the target of, because they represent, if you're Christian, you're conservative. So you address in the book how we deal, or how we can deal in this argument culture without feeling intimidated and persecuted and singled out.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So let's go back to the town hall meeting, where it's going to be a volatile issue, and you know the people that are going to be there have really strong feelings against the Christian perspective. The beauty of the book is that we not only take a look at what the scriptures have to say, but we take a look at what people who have studied communication throughout the centuries have said. So Aristotle would say this. Aristotle would say the most important thing about that town hall meeting is the reputation you have before you walk through the door. That would be the single most persuasive thing about you. So if as a pastor or a Christian, you've done the really hard work of neighbor love so that you have reached out to people consistently and to everybody, not just the people who agree with your position, not just Christians, but you have shown neighbor love even to people who are from Planned Parenthood. right? In their time of need, you've reached out to them, right? So now when you walk through the door, people go, oh, okay, yeah, I know this guy. Oh, yeah, this is the guy who helped us. Oh, their church is great. Now you have a hearing because you've done the hard work of tilling the soil long before you speak. And let me give you a great illustration of this. We have wildfires here in California.
Right.
And so like 3 years ago, we had horrible wildfires. We have one high school in Brea where we live, and it was hit hard by these wildfires. So all the shrubbery, all the landscaping was burnt to a crisp. Well, the school system has no money to replace that. It took 2 weeks to open the school back up, but they're not going to take a look at landscaping.
Right.
So 3 churches got together, approached the school board and said, hey, listen, on 3 consecutive weekends, we're going to come, we're going to pay for everything, and we're going to do all the landscaping, all the shrubbery. And you know what happened? Every single weekend, one of the members of the school board joined one of the churches to help plant shrubbery. Right? So now imagine a school board meeting a year from now, and my church shows up, and what's the first thing the school board thinks? Oh, hey, Tim, hey, man, thank you again for that landscaping. Every time I drive into school, it looks awesome. Hey, thank you. Now, what's up? What do you got? Do you see how important that is? If you're just walking in cold to a town hall meeting, and the only reason they know your face is because you show up because you're ticked off,
Right.
then I think we have very little credibility. So a lot of the book is about doing the hard work before you even open your mouth.
You bring up an interesting point, and that is that the role of the church is to be an integral part of the community.
Yes.
Not to be a community unto itself.
Yep.
And over 2,000 years, we have lost that vision. We become internally consuming, internally serving, internally supporting.
Yes.
And then when it comes to the work of missions, we go to third world countries.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was stunning to me when I heard that the Korean church missions budget, that the third largest amount of missions dollars budgeted and spent is mission work to the United States.
Oh, wow.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
The South Korean church feels that America is the third largest country in need of missionaries.
Wow. Wow.
What have we done?
Yeah.
We are the icon of a Judeo-Christian nation, the largest single population in the world of a blended Judeo-Christian population in the world. Abundance of churches, abundance of communities, abundance of real estate, and billions. Denominations own billions of dollars of real estate. And we've taken the church and so internally focused that it's not what it was designed to be.
I couldn't agree more. I think it was because we felt attacked. I think it was because we felt hurt by people who went after our values and attacked us, on air, through social media. We felt like school systems were moving away from our values. And so what did we do? We went inward. We started our own schools. We started our own graduate programs. And so we didn't need anybody else. Hey, our church is large enough. We can fund and take care of each other, right? We can start our own basketball leagues, right? We don't need high school basketball. And again, I don't want to knock all of that, but we became inward focused. So in the book, we actually used the city of Antioch in the New Testament as a test case. Antioch had massive overcrowding problems. I mean, it was almost inhumane conditions when it came to sanitary issues and things like that. So the church in Antioch had a decision to make, right? Do we take care of our own, or do we actually help the city of Antioch? And that's where Christians were first called little Christ. And we make the argument based on theologians and historians that that was not a derogatory term. It was a begrudging sign of respect to call them little Christ. But they stepped in and really helped sanitation issues. Christian benefactors actually helped pave roads, paid for roads to be paved. So that's what I think a church needs to do. We need to look around us and say, what does our community need? Is it to help the homeless? Is it food drives? Is it to help even the least of these within any community? We're the ones who step up and say, hey, listen, we are an integral part of this community. And what's cool about the book, I think, is that we're really arguing not on a national level, right? Few of us have enough credibility to deal with national issues on a national level. We're arguing at your local level, right. You can actually become part of the civic government. You can actually become part of the school board system. And we can make huge inroads locally. Now, of course, write letters to senators. We can even march on Washington if we want to. We can vote, certainly. But locally is where you're going to have the most impact, the most credibility as a church.
Well, we're talking with Tim Muehlhoff, co-author of a new book, Winsome Persuasion, Christian Influence in a Post-Christian World. It really is a journey back to the role of the church, its identity as an integral part of the community, and being an agent of change from within as opposed to an outsider's position. And that in order to have this winsome persuasion, it is because you are present in the community. You are present in the day-to-day activities. Therefore, when issues arise, it is a member of the peer group, not an outsider bringing in a conservative or opposing agenda. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about this very, very interesting concept of redefining the church back to its original definition and applying it in your community. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, Prophecy in the News videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're revisiting with our good friend Tim Muehlhoff, talking about his new work, Winsome Persuasion, Christian Influence in a Post-Christian World. When we, before the break, we were talking about the church being an integral part of a community and therefore not being viewed as an outsider coming in to speak about whatever the issue of the day is, but being recognized as a member of the community and therefore not being considered to be or labeled as an opposition voice or as a conservative or divisive, but because of their presence in the community, the services rendered to the community, their integration into the community, that they were recognized as a member in good standing in the community. And this has not been the model that many churches, most churches, have created for themselves. They become institutions within themselves, with their own schools, with their own educational systems, with their own programs. Now, I'm not unfamiliar with this because this was the Jewish community. This is what we did because we had to do it because we were outsiders and we were a persecuted people that could only trust within the ranks of the tribe, and therefore we built our own community centers. But in my lifetime, I've seen those community centers go from being exclusive to the Jewish community to now being community centers for the community. And you didn't have to be Jewish. It was almost a reverse discrimination. It was the Jewish Community Center, still called the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, but anybody can join, anybody can take the classes, anybody can use the pool, anybody can go there. And we've now found a way to enter the community and be a part of it, as opposed to the protective way we came to America, which was to gather the troops, circle the wagons, protect our own, because we are under attack. We're the only ones that are going to protect ourselves. We've now grown into the community. We have our own set of issues of persecution with anti-Semitism, but nevertheless, you'll find that the Jewish community is more community present in most major cities than many of the denominational Christianity, denominational churches, who don't open their facilities to other than members of the congregation. So how do we address two issues? The first issue is this denominational divide. I'm a Baptist church and I get involved in the community, and there becomes some alliance and allegiance, and I'm not considered a part of this community, but the Methodist or the Lutheran or the Catholic or the Episcopalian church says, well, hey, the Baptists are involved in that. We're not going to join into that. We see that as not as a secular community work. We see that as an ecumenical divide, and if we start having fellowship with people of a different theological foundation, God warned us back in Deuteronomy about assimilation, taking on other gods. My goodness, we're going to apply that today, and we're going to keep this separate. We're going to have to find our own individual way. So then Christianity and the church becomes somewhat limited. If you're the first one to be involved in community, you could be the only one. So how do we form an ecumenical community first within the churches in our community to create a mindset that winsome persuasion is going to happen first among ourselves, and then we together as the believing community, not denominationally, bring it as here are citizens wanting to serve as citizens from this faith community and join together. Would that reconciliation be also a form of winsome persuasion?
Yeah, we better get this worked out. We better figure this out, or we're going to not only lose credibility with the community, but I think we're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and have to give an account. So a couple quick things. One, again, not to bring politics into this, but I think the church better learn from the Republican Party at this point. So here they are with the majority, and they said before the election that Obamacare, repealing Obamacare and replacing it with a different form of health care, was their number one priority. So now they have the majority, and they can't get it done because there's conservatives, moderates, and liberals within the Republican Party, and President Trump has learned a very interesting lesson. He can't bring them all together. And so right now, they have the majority, but they cannot decide on what to do because nobody's going to give.
Right.
So I think the church right now, we have a huge opportunity to come together and focus on certain projects, and we can multiply our effectiveness. So go back to the wildfires for a second. It wasn't one church that stepped up and said, hey, we can pay for all the shrubbery and landscaping. You know, one church wouldn't be able to do that. But 3 churches got together and said, hey, listen, let's focus on this one project. Listen, we're not marrying each other. We know that we have theological differences with each other, but can we come together for one simple project? And we did, and it was great. We argue in the book that not only should that happen, that kind of cooperation happen between Christian groups, we argue that kind of cooperation can actually happen between a Christian and a non-Christian group, and we give some unbelievably great examples in the book about Christian groups partnering with non-Christian groups to do social good. We mentioned Focus on the Family.
Yes.
Under Jim Daly's leadership. Jim Daly is the product of the foster care system. And so when he took over, Focus on the Family, in the state of Colorado is a newspaper called The Independent, incredibly liberal newspaper that would attack James Dobson regularly.
Right.
Well, Daly said, hey, listen, I want to fix or address the foster care system in Colorado because it's broken. So he approached The Independent and said, hey, let's join forces and address the foster care system. And The Independent said, yes, let's do it. We can do this. Both had to sell it to their two communities, but both did. And they came together and created this event called Fostering the Foster Care System. It was wildly successful, brought a lot of attention to it, raised a ton of money. And again, these two groups were adults. They know that they disagreed on many issues, but they agreed on this one crucial issue. I think the church needs to work with each other, but we can also work with non-Christian groups.
Our differences denominationally have created barriers to unity.
Yeah.
And God says, behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity.
Yeah.
Who do you see are the ones to initiate this winsome persuasion, this unification within the congregation and congregations and communities? Is this driven as a elder deacon board saying, as a local community church, we've reviewed our roster of mission projects, and we don't have any local presence. We are great in Guatemala, we're great in Salvador, we're great in Tanzania. We built schools and orphanages and we do wonderful work, but we don't do anything at home except what serves the purpose of the church.
Yeah.
And make it the mission of every church to have a minimum of one community-focused missions project or work that goes outside the four walls of the congregation.
Yeah. Well, our church a couple years ago started something called Love Fullerton. My church is in Fullerton, California.
Right.
And so we partnered with other churches, and we take one weekend where we go out into the community. And again, this has been planned all year, reaching out to different groups, senior citizen homes, food banks, groups that work with the homeless, Christian and non-Christian groups alike. So it culminates on this weekend where thousands of people from a ton of different denominations go out and they actually do service projects for the city of Fullerton. It has grown so much that now it's been endorsed by the chief of police. It's been endorsed by the chief of the fire department. The civic government has recognized Love Fullerton. So it was started by Christians working cross-denominationally, but now a ton of non-Christian groups actually join it, to the degree that 3 years ago I was asked to come address the civic government of Brea. So every employee of the city of Brea was required to be at this meeting, and I got a chance to speak for my book, I Beg to Differ, that you mentioned, on how to have good, productive conversations. Now, I wasn't allowed to bring in the gospel. I had to be very sensitive.
Right.
But I taught from the book of Proverbs using Jewish wisdom literature. But I thought, how cool that when I was introduced, they said, hey, Tim is a member of our community. He teaches at Biola University, which everybody knows in Brea. That's the Biblical Institute of Los Angeles.
Right.
He's part of this Love Fullerton group. So again, my credibility walking in was pretty high, but also here's a chance for me to address civic leaders, and it all started because of Love Fullerton. So those kind of projects I think we need to do more of. I think that's always been the DNA of the church.
Do you think that that is the ultimate key to raising the ability for us to have a voice which is not a voice of opposition, but it is a community member of equal status as neighbor, friend, peer, co-worker, co-servant, and that until we become the hands and feet of Messiah by identifying with the secular community we live in, that we've created our own form of separationist attitude. We created this void. It was time for us to be introspective and say, you know, we are perceived this way because we're an outsider.
That's right.
And the insiders are all given the platform and received, but the outsider is bringing new thought, new message, and he's divisive. But if they know you as a non-divisive peer member, that you're going to have the same status even if you are in opposition. And you will be heard, and heard respectfully, by using this winsome persuasion and this approach. And in the meantime, you are presenting the gospel through these acts of service, through this community outreach that isn't, oh, by the way, I'm here planting shrubbery. You want to come to my church on Sunday? It's
yeah, exactly. Let me give you another illustration. So I had 3 boys who played football, high school football. So when you got 3 boys playing high school football, of course my wife and I joined the football boosters, right? These are a group of parents. We're all busy, but we care about the football program at Brea, so we got to raise money. We have to do all these different kind of things. So we're meeting like once a week with the booster program, right? Well, every once in a while, some parents would get really mad at us because why do we have to raise money? Why do we have to do this, you know? So they would come every once in a while and address the booster club, right? But we didn't know who they were. It's like they never attended a car wash. They never, we didn't even see them at the games sometimes. So here they come to the booster club and they're mad and they want us to change something. And we're just sitting there looking at them the whole time going, I don't even know who you are. Now, there were other parents who showed up for everything. They would show up with a suggestion of how to do things better. And we would immediately listen to them and say, hey, thanks for all you do for Brea football. Now, what do you got? Well, I think we could do this better. Oh, okay. Well, explain that. What would that look right? It is totally different if I view you as an insider or an outsider. And you earn the right to be heard. And I think the church has not wanted to do that. We don't want to earn the right to be heard. We just want to walk in with a prophetic voice and demand to be heard. And there's a huge difference between earning the right to be heard and demanding to be heard. And I think often the church has said, I demand that you respect the values that I have, where rather the early church earned the right to be heard by the Roman Empire.
You know, this is really one of the first open dialogues that honestly has us take responsibility for some of the reaction that we receive because we created the separate entities. We were vocally in opposition to what they stood for, and we've become advocates for definition of marriage as biblical. We become advocates for all that, but we have a one position, one message, one methodology approach to it, and there's nothing about it that's relational.
Right, unfortunately, yes.
Now, what if that wildfire had been at some community place that not every believer thought was a good place, but yet it was still in the community. And now am I going to pass judgment on how I serve a part of my community? Jesus did not discriminate. Well, actually, he did discriminate. He discriminated and said, I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick. So I am discriminating against the healthy, I am going to the sick. So let's say, for example, that the I can't even think of an organization. It certainly wouldn't be Planned Parenthood, but let's say it was a building, and it was in the middle of the city, and it was a poor reflection on the community that it was in this dilapidated condition. Are you more committed to your opposition to Planned Parenthood than you are committed to being a member of a community that wants to restore a dilapidated building or restore something that the community itself accepts?
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that?
Okay, now you're trying to get me in trouble.
That's right.
But here's what I would say. So let's say Planned Parenthood is hit by the wildfire. Okay? Well, here's what I think we can absolutely do. If anybody who has been injured, anybody who has had smoke inhalation issues, anybody who is receiving care of some kind, we absolutely go to those people. We ask if we can help. Can we provide meals for these individuals? We go to the hospital to pray for them. We say, is there anything we can help you with health-wise? Okay? I think we can go and, as cleanup is happening, I think we can help. If it's all right, so let me give you my precedent for this that we use in the book. So you know that Chick-fil-A has received a lot of negative press, particularly from the gay community, because their CEO, in an interview, was simply asked, do you affirm traditional marriage? He simply said, guilty as charged, yes, I do. I affirm traditional marriage. Right. Well, you know the campaign that they got hit with, It Tastes Like Hate, was graffitied. A lot of people boycotted Chick-fil-A. Well, remember when the Pulse nightclub, a gay nightclub in Florida, tragically, it was one of the worst mass shootings in the history of the United States?
Yes.
Here's what Chick-fil-A did. They have had a long-term policy of closing their doors on Sundays. They opened their doors on Sunday, and anyone, fire workers, police, volunteers, could come and get free sandwiches, free drinks, free everything. Now, no doubt there were gay activists who were volunteering to help with this nightclub to refurbish it, right? But Chick-fil-A said, no, we're providing sandwiches for everybody. I could envision the church doing something like that, even with a group like Planned Parenthood. You know what I mean? Something like that. Now, that's a very fine line, right? I mean, our opposition to Planned Parenthood, everybody knows what it is. We are absolutely unapologetically pro-life. But I do think it's in those moments that people see us extending neighbor love even to the groups that we most bitterly disagree with. I think we're going to see the needle change, that in the long term we'll have an opportunity to argue pro-life issues with a group that has been completely shut off to our message. But that kind of neighbor love, that opens doors that people can hear our message.
Well, I think the message is clear that if we are going to affect change, we have to be a part of what it is we are trying to change. Yes. And it cannot be done in any capacity. Corporations, families, it can't be done from the outside in as dogma or doctrine. It has to be lived out shoulder to shoulder where relationships take place. And so I encourage our audience to get a hold of this new book called Winsome Persuasion, Christian influence in a post-Christian world and change the model of our presence in the community to being perceived as familiar, peer group, and a non-threatening, non-condemning entity with an equal voice. Although it may be a dissenting voice, it is still given the opportunity to present. Where right now there's a matter of persecution and silencing because our prior attitude has been outside, judgmental, condemning, and has been adversarial. And the time for that needs to change. And this is a blueprint for doing that. Tim Muehlhoff, great to be back with you. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good to see you
God's
again.
best.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back.